Greetings, everyone. With the students getting their permits within the next few weeks, I wanted to make this quick video and to show you some stuff to do when they first get it, when they first get behind the wheel, which is going to make this whole process almost always much easier than it would have been otherwise. And being that I've been doing this forever, over tens of thousands of lessons, I know precisely what mistakes and deficiencies brand new drivers have, and taking maybe 1 or 2 hours to practice this stuff with your sons or daughters will definitely, like I said, make the whole process easier. Okay, so the first one is basic steering control, and for this you want to go to a big empty parking lot. The bigger and emptier the better, although you may not have a real big one or a real empty one, but any parking lot where you can do what we're doing here will work, okay? And you can see the red line, obviously you can, and that's kind of going to be the desired travel path. You want to practice with your kid until they can do that quite precisely and consistently, okay? And some of you may be thinking, well, how could anybody not do this stuff? That's so easy. Boy, would you be surprised. Here's what's going to happen sometimes, something like this. They'll turn too early, they'll cut across the parking spaces, they'll go over here, and then something like this. And obviously it would be a lot better to have an empty parking lot than a full one. But this is a good place to start, and it's just basic directional control. Now I want to say that probably the majority of the students are going to be able to pick this up quite quickly without any problem. But there will be some that don't pick it up. And this is where you want to help them get over that problem of basic steering control where there's nothing to hit. So very obviously, a very fundamental part of driving is to be able to get the car around the corner without hitting anything. And here again, a lot of people may think, how could anybody have a problem doing that? And again, I would say, boy, would those people be surprised in many cases. So let me show you a couple common problems that brand new drivers make and some suggestions about how to remedy those problems. Okay, here we have an illustration more or less about what it should look like. Okay, bringing it around, keeping it tight on the right side without hitting the curb, and then straightening it out and going straight. However, let me show you a real common issue. The new driver will start the turn much later than they should. The car goes way wide, and then they don't correct the steering and it goes off the road. Both going wide and going off the road are obviously fraught with danger, so we want to avoid that. So what I tell the students is to start the turn when the front of the car is at the corner, which is going to be sooner than their instinct is telling them to do it. And that's a big part of teaching people to drive, is to kind of beat their instinct to the task. You want to have them envision a target point, okay, where the car is going to be after it comes around the corner. Then also have them draw that mental travel path and then just follow that path to the target. Left turns are generally not the problem that right turns are, but they can still have problems. So this can be done again on a street. I know there's a yellow line there, which there would be on an arterial, but the yellow line in this case is just to separate the directions. This can be done on a residential street quite easily. So let's look at the way it should be done. Going around. All right, so if your kid is having a problem with that, like cutting the left turn, again, one of the big solutions, look for the target. Okay, where is the car going to go? It's going to go from the right side where we are now to the right side. And again, it's very helpful to have them kind of draw a mental line toward that target and then steer through that path. Drill number 3 is what I call the go and stop drill. And some people would say, well, shouldn't it be stop and go? No, because in order to stop, you got to be going first. So I think grammatically I win on that one. Definite and very important points to it. And the first point is to consistently distinguish the gas and the brake. You do not want them getting the gas and brake mixed up when you're out driving in traffic. And although they may know that theoretically, first time they go out in traffic, they can kind of get information overload and start mixing those up. This is really not a problem for me because I can control the car from the right side, but for you it can be a problem. So we want to try to eliminate that as much as possible. The second is judging distance in front of the vehicle, because that has to be pretty accurate and it has to be intuitive. And number 3 is to look forward and planning an action. So here we are. This can be a parking lot. It can be a street. And let's say in this case we're maybe 400 or 500 feet back from a point that they're going to stop the car, from maybe about 10 or 15 miles an hour. It would be really nice to have a very defined stop point like that black line, but that's not always going to be the case. If you can find a situation like that, that's great. But let's say that yellow car is parked there, so you're going to tell the student, go up and stop our car when you're right abreast or right in front of that yellow car. And this is what it should look like. Go right up and stop right there when the front of the car is at the line or the desired stop point. However, very often, this is going to happen. They will either greatly overshoot it, or they will stop the car way before that point. Okay, so what again we want is this. All right, now let me kind of go back to a point I was making before about looking ahead, planning an action, and executing it. One of the deficiencies of being inexperienced is not looking far enough ahead, not thinking far enough ahead, and not acting far enough ahead. Everything is kind of delayed. So this exercise will help kind of overcome that. And as far as distinguishing the gas from the brake, put into their muscle memory which does which. And they can think about it all they want, or you can talk about it all they want, but really the only way to develop that muscle memory is to actually do it. Step 4, hills and curves. Obviously when you're driving, a big part of that is to look ahead, see where the road goes, which is not always going to be straight, kind of plan what you're going to do with the steering input and steer through the curve accurately, which is a kind of a pretentious way of saying keep the damn car on the road. Also hills, giving it the proper amount of gas going up the hill and the proper amount of braking going down the hill. There is really no better place to practice this stuff, initially anyway, than cemeteries. And now I got to tell you something here. Up until about a year ago, I sent people to a place on Queen Anne called the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, and because it was really the best place to do this until about a year ago. And then I get a phone call from somebody that kind of, I would imagine, looks like this. And this guy, to say he was not at all happy was a real understatement. Okay. And so if you do, probably just best not to go in there. Okay. But if you do, if you just have to go into Mount Pleasant, at least don't tell anybody that I sent you, okay? I'm going to go on the record right now. I'm telling you not to go in there because I really don't need this kind of trouble. All right. But here's some other suggestions. Lakeview up on Capitol Hill, Calvary, Northeast Seattle above U Village, and Forest Lawn in West Seattle. They are also really good for this type of thing. All right. So here we are in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, and you can see what they're doing. Except, of course, they're not stopping all the time. The way I did this animation, I did it in kind of a hurry. So again, I think you kind of get the picture on that one. And this, like I said, spend maybe 30 to 60 minutes there in the cemetery doing that. Go around all the way around and then go back the other direction. Maybe take a few detours in there, and I think you'll notice quite an improvement in their ability to drive in a short period of time. So I'm going to wrap things up here by talking about spatial relations judgment. And basically what that is the driver's ability to intuitively judge how far they are from objects on the outside of the car. Now, if you or I were in that green car, we would have a pretty good idea how far we were from anything on the left, the right, in front, or in back. Maybe not down to the inch, but accurate enough to avoid, problem situations. Now, this is a standard width Seattle residential street. The cars on the top and the bottom, they are parked. And the proper way to drive on these streets is right down the middle, as perfectly centered as possible. That way, if somebody opens a door on either side, you can still make it through. However, the inexperienced driver will have a tendency to do something like this. They will hug those cars on the right. There's absolutely no point trying to do that since you can only get one car at a time through that opening. Now, why do they do this? Well, I will tell you. Because a very, very, very common characteristic of inexperienced drivers is tunnel vision. In other words, they're staring about 50 feet right in front of the car. Their field of visual attention is represented in that blue area there in front of the yellow car. And they're missing everything else. And they are not intuitively aware of their distance to anything on the right. Okay? So that's one reason on drives I'm very commonly about every 2 or 3 seconds pushing the car back over to the left, and then the student keeps drifting to the right. And if I wasn't there to do it, the only way they would know that they were too far to the right is that awful sound of the screeching metal. So spend some time on residential streets where the cars are parked on both sides, which they usually are in this city, and have them practice keeping the car absolutely perfectly centered, but keep in mind they will have a tendency to pull off to the right. So just keep on pushing them over to the left a bit to keep them centered. Now, if you notice that your son or daughter is having a problem with some of this stuff after you've practiced it a while, there is an app called Fastlane Street Racing, and it works better on a pad than a phone, but it still works really well on either. And it's a pretty sophisticated game. It has both a gas and brake. Now, the purpose of playing with this app, which you can get a free version of, is not to race the other cars. I tell my students, just let the other cars hit you. Don't worry about it. Just have them get the car around the race course once, dead slow, keeping it on the road, and that's it. And then after they can do that, they can kind of speed it up. This is actually much more challenging than really driving. It's actually a lot harder. But what this does is it kind of helps develop that eye-hand coordination. Okay, in other words, they see where the car needs to go, they think far enough ahead, and they steer it in that direction, and they accelerate and brake at the proper time. And I find that students that are having problems with directional control, if they do actually get this app and actually do play with it, I actually do notice improvement. Make sure it's fast lane street racing, not racer. They are not the same thing. Again, it's fast lane street racing. And don't worry, it does not encourage street racing, okay, but it's actually quite helpful. Now, I also want to say that all this stuff, these drills, which shouldn't take you very long, these are not suggestions. These are requirements, okay? This is mandatory. I want the students to go through this stuff with you before they get in the car with me. Again, in my program, we do not drive around a parking lot at 3 miles an hour. We go right out into the real world right away on the first drive. And students who can't do this stuff because they haven't really practiced it with their parents for various reasons, they don't really get a lot out of the drive. In the parent orientation, I will go through this stuff again in more detail. But as soon as the kid gets their permit, I want you to go ahead and actually do this, all right? If you don't have time, make the time, because it is really important, and you're going to be glad you did it, because once they can master these skills about keeping the car on a travel path and stopping it at the correct point and driving through curves in the cemetery, once you go out on the street with them, it's going to be significantly safer and immeasurably less stressful for you if they can already do this stuff. I mean, face it, you got to learn to crawl before you can walk, and you got to learn to walk before you can run. And so that's what this is about. It's on this, okay? Now, keep this in mind right there. Experience reduces collisions. There are very few absolutes in this world. This is one of those absolutes. Let's say somebody shows up and wants to take the drive test with me that has 0 hours of driving experience. When I say 0 hours, I will also tell you about half the driver testing I do at my office. They are not my own students. They are members of the general public. And so, let's say somebody, the only experience they've had is 6 hours with me. And this happens way too much, I might add, because there's a lot of students, they drive up to my office, they went through my course, they took the 6 hours with me, and then their parents are driving them to the drive test. That should not be the case, I will tell you, because the parents are afraid to ride with them. And let's say they pass the test, which they might. Okay, that is possible. Well, you know, the possibility of getting in a collision after they get their license is just that. It is extreme. In fact, it's almost a guarantee. But as those pre-license hours go up, the collision probability goes down. Okay? Yeah, very reliable. Okay, there's very definitely a connection there. Now, I can tell you, say, oh, don't be afraid. Don't get stressed out. You're going to love this. It's going to be a love fest with little hearts coming up out of somewhere. Okay? Yeah, see, I could tell you that. I could tell you that. I could tell you that. And, you know, like, oh, here's a mother driving with her wonderful son, Zach, you know, and what is Zach thinking? God, yeah. So I could tell you that, and then you could hook me up to a lie detector, technically called a polygraph machine, not admissible in court, by the way. And you know what would probably happen? It would like ignite. Yeah, it would like catch on fire because I'd be lying my head off. If you are at all normal, which I'm assuming you are, this can be stressful. This can be boring. What's really bad is when it's both boring and stressful. You can't get much worse than that, you know?
So if you follow the instructions in that video I sent you, I can pretty much guarantee that if you go through that process, that's going to make this whole thing easier. All right. Oh, and by the way, I put this in the text in the email, but in case you didn't get the message, I'm going to give it to you again. Cemeteries are fantastic places to start kids off in because you've got curves and you've got hills, and it's really good. It's a good place to start. However, please do not go in to the Mount Pleasant Cemetery on Queen Anne, even though it's the best one to do it in. Or if you do, don't tell them I sent you there because I mean they just like last fall, whoever ran that place, my God, the phone call I got was like, holy God, was it really that bad? Do you need to get this upset about it? Okay, I appreciate it. All right. Now, let's say you're out driving with good old Zach here, and you're not completely relaxed, but you're not panicked either, somewhere in between the two. And I'm sure none of you look like that. If you do, I can give you the name of a good plastic surgeon. Um, but okay, Zach's not perfect, but he's not terrible. Okay, but Zach's behind the wheel, and here you are headed up to a red light, and a bunch of pedestrians there, and Zach, or whatever the kid's name is, they don't seem to be stepping on the brakes. They're stepping on the gas, and you're about to see something really, you're conceiving of something extremely bad happening here. And now you're panicking, which is a very good reason to panic, okay? Yes, I will tell you what to do. Now, when this happens in one of my cars, and God, I currently have three different cars I teach in. I'm a one-person operation. I got three cars. Um, but uh, that's not a problem for me because I got a brake on my side. One of my cars has a brake and an accelerator on the right side. Okay. And so it's not a problem for me, not a problem at all. This can be a problem for you though. Okay, let me tell you, there's a couple ways around this to at least minimize the bad situation. This is the best kind of car to have your kid in, where you have access from the passenger seat to the gear selector and the parking brake. That, by the way, is an old cable driven type of parking brake. One of my cars has that. That older type is actually better than the newer types. Okay. Now, you don't have a brake on your side, but you do have the parking brake. Okay. However, be aware, if the driver is on the gas pedal and you pull the parking brake, will it stop the car? Usually not, because the parking brake only works on the rear brakes, and most of the braking power is achieved through the front brakes. Okay, but it's better than nothing. Also, keep in mind, as soon as you pull that, the back brakes will instantly lock. Okay, but it can be better than the alternative. But you can make that more effective if you have to use it in a worst case scenario. What I always do anytime I use my brake, which is used hundreds of times every week, okay, what I do is I shove the gear selector one click forward to neutral. That disconnects the engine from the transmission. The engine revs up, but the engine is no longer propelling the car, making the parking brake much more effective. Okay, you obviously are not going to have a brake installed on the right side of the car like I have in mind. Something which I can do myself, except the car I just bought. There's no way I can make it work, so I'm going to have it put in at great expense. But it's way too expensive. But there's an alternative. There's a device called the controller. It's called the controller passenger safety brake. They're about $100. Or if you absolutely really need one, I have two. I actually own two of them, slightly different variations of each other. Now, do they work? They do work. They actually do work. And they're very easy to put in and take out. Okay, it's just a screw clamp on the brake shaft. All right, very easy. I will tell you that they do not work as well as the promotional video says they do because I have experimented with them. Okay, and because you have to use both arms on them, and you have to really lean into it. But they do work. Okay. And there's another one called the wing brake, which costs about the same amount of money. I've never tried the wing brake, but just looking at it, I cannot imagine it would work as well as the controller would. But that's something you may want to consider if it makes you really nervous to be out with your kid. Okay, so when they get in the car with me, trust me, I know it's their first lesson. They can make all the mistakes they want to make. It's like not a big deal. I'm used to it. And I want them to be at the stage where they can turn and recover the steering. And those of you who have at least watched that video I sent the other day know what I'm talking about. That means start the turn at the correct point and end the turn at the correct point. Maintain a straight path. You may be thinking, how could anybody not drive straight? Boy, would you be surprised. Get it up to 15 or 20 and stop under reasonable control. And there again, I had like a corny little animation in that video about this. Consistently and intuitively knowing the difference between the gas and the brake. All right. I tell the students this on the first drive. There's a little standard speech everybody gets when they first get in the car with me. I said, the worst thing you can do when you are in the car with me is to stop the car when it should be moving. All right? Because at that point, the probability of getting rear-ended goes up about 1,000-fold right then. And when I'm in the car, I spend about half my daily energy trying not to get rear-ended. So two things I'm very big on. No unnecessary stopping and not driving too slow. I do not let students drive too slow. That is dangerous. I see other driving schools out there, holding up traffic, and, I just don't let that happen. You do that, somebody's going to be right on your tail. And then if the student has to step on the brakes unexpectedly, slambo, rear end collision. By the way, I have been in collisions on lessons, but they have never been our fault. We have been rear ended. There's nothing I can do about that. But there again, one reason I think my safety record is so much better than anybody else's is because I say we're going to keep up with the flow of the traffic. If that's not exactly the speed limit, I'm just not concerned about that, okay? Won't we get a ticket? No, it's never happened yet. The only time we've ever been pulled over by the cops, which has happened, is because the student was driving too slow. Okay, big empty parking lot. Okay, you want to be able to drive around following that travel path, not that travel path. Okay. And when they're driving around there, pretend all those parking spaces are full of very expensive cars with the owner standing right there who you do not want mad at you. Because look at that guy. He's about to eat, looks like a very undercooked hamburger with his bare hands, Would you want that guy mad at you? I wouldn't want that guy mad at me. Okay. There again, consistently go around like that. And most students will not have a problem with this. But if they're all over the road, well, you want to keep doing that till they can actually do it. And that's going to be about half the battle. Right turns. Start the turn when the front of the car is at the corner, bring it around, recover steering, stays on the right half. One of the biggest deficiencies of new drivers is the wide right turn. Okay. The turn is started too late. The car goes over to the other side of the street. They don't recover, and the car goes off the road. And then person standing there can be in big trouble. Okay. And I mentioned about 15 minutes ago this kid I'm working with. Uh, what we are doing right now is for a solid hour, all we do is make right and left turns, and I've just got to I got to narrow him through the whole thing. And hopefully someday, you know, that will be intuitive. But yeah, it is an extreme case though. Okay, so again, start the turn when the front of the car is at the corner. There's some things when you're with your kid in the car, with them driving, you definitely want to avoid. Okay. You can't necessarily avoid this, but you got to be careful with it. And this is something that can kind of be shocking. Is shocking too strong of a term? Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. But one interesting thing you're going to find out, even let's say your kid can drive really well going forward, it's no problem at all. They just do it. Once they put the car in reverse, very often that's not the case anymore. Okay. For most people, what happens with the front of the vehicle in relationship with what they do with the steering is more or less intuitive. It may not be perfect, but it's usually good enough. They put it in reverse, and this, boy, I've noticed this. Even people who come and take the drive test, let's say that I get a lot of people who are from Eastern Canada. So they come here, they get a job with Amazon or Google or Microsoft. And so they need to get a license, they got to take the test. And, you know, you drive and, the drive test is practically just like a nice little ride, because they can drive just fine. They had a license in Toronto for 15 years. And one of the things on the drive test involved backing the car around the corner. And this is something that even people who can drive virtually perfectly going forward, they usually murder it, And but it is important to know how to have the car go in both directions. And reversing is parking is generally the theme of lesson number 3 in the car. Not always, but that's kind of the standard way of doing it. Okay. But just be careful with this, that, if, you're in kind of a tight situation in a parking lot and involves reversing, it can be bad. So just really be watchful of any kind of reversing. An unprotected left turn, what that means is when you are turning left, you have oncoming traffic and there is no green arrow to hold the oncoming traffic for you. This is the theme of drive number 2. And I put great emphasis on this. What we do is we pull the car over. I've got a book of graphics. I explain the process. Okay. I say, do you understand this? And they say, yes. I said, okay, we're going to go do this. And we do these repeatedly. All right. One reason you have to be careful on these is because the fact of the matter is, if anybody gets hit, it's you sitting on the right side of the car. And I would imagine that impalement is one hell of a way to very quickly ruin an otherwise nice afternoon. Complex lane changes. One thing, and I got some graphics about for these two. One thing that students very reliably suck at is lane changes. And it's usually because they're way too timid about it. And multiple lane entrances. Okay, here comes the examples. Let's say theoretically that you live way up here on your private estate and you got this long winding driveway that goes down to the street. And there are some people that actually live in such places. Okay, but that driveway you got that runs through your private forest with those bonsai trees is so narrow that it requires backing all the way down to the street. Well, you've done this thousands of times. You don't have a problem with it. And you have utter faith in good old boy Randy there. Unless Randy wants to be a fashion model of some kind, in which case I think he might have some challenges in front of him, looking at that puss. So you're thinking, my boy Randy can handle it. Here's what's going to happen. Just perfect. Very likely that's not going to be the case. I'm talking reverse now. Okay, keep that in mind. Uh-oh. Randy hits that 200-year-old bonsai tree, and all of a sudden, your mood has taken a big turn for the worse in a very short duration of time. All right? Yeah. So again, just be careful with reverse, no matter how good the kid is going forward. Unprotected left turn. Here is the situation that you got to be most careful with. Okay, that truck or that sometimes just that vehicle that's opposite you that's also turning blocks your view of the opposing lane. The driver will be able to see that, but because you're sitting 3 feet to the right and the angle at which you are looking at it, you can't see it. Okay? So, and again, I go over this on drive number 2. I go over it very thoroughly. Let's say you're kind of afraid to do this, which you should be, all right? How do you avoid it? Just that simple, avoid it. Okay. Go down to where there's a protected left turn with an arrow. Maybe it's like a few blocks longer, but it's a hell of a lot safer. Not to mention less stressful. Okay. That's a two-way stop the red cars. That don't do stuff like this. I don't even do stuff like this. You don't really want the student crossing more than one direction of traffic. The exception is maybe if it's at night, there's not a lot of traffic, maybe you can do it, but you want to like kind of keep things simple in the beginning for them and safe. All right. So again, go down to where there's a four-way stop. Okay. This is something that a lot of people do wrong, not only new drivers, but a lot of drivers, period. And I've really noticed this from people who come into my office to take the drive test who have been driving for anywhere from 10 to 20 years. They still make this error. Those two silvery cars are parked and they are blocking the driver's view of the lateral traffic. The lateral traffic being a pretentious way of saying, let's not get hit by that red car, please. Okay, now here's the mistake a lot of people make. They come straight out until they can see. Here's the problem. By the time they're out there far enough to see, they're already out there. And that can happen. We want to avoid that, needless to say. The answer to this problem is ridiculously simple, yet a lot of people do not employ it. Okay, and when you conceive of this from a principle of geometry, it makes perfect sense. Instead of thinking you're going to pull onto the street, what I have people do is I say, just pull over to the angle of the car very sharp to the right. And I do mean sharp, like you're pulling to the curb. And the driver will be able to see that traffic without actually being out in it. Okay. That's the very simple way of getting around that issue. And again, when you think about it from a principle of geometry, it makes perfect sense. All right. Okay. And again, this video Come on, video. This one that starts. I'm coming up to the stop sign. I stop at the stop sign because it says stop, so I will. First stop is always predestined. Cannot see anything to the left. Nothing. If I went now, it would be like Russian roulette. So I got to get out to where I can see. Okay. Now the parked cars, they're not relevant. The moving ones are very relevant. So I'm going to come out a bit more. I'm going to angle a bit sharper to the right. Now, at this point here, I can see, but I want to watch what I do now. I'm going to angle about 5 more degrees to the right, and I'm going to come out about another 18 inches from here. Now, watch what happens here. Here it comes to there. I have pretty much tripled my range of visibility, and I'm still not actually out there. So again, that's how you get around that issue. Like that. Lane changes. Okay. 2 kind of reliable mistakes students make. We are in the right lane, and I need to get the student into the left lane for various reasons. Okay. We're in the yellow car. Most common mistake is they slow way down. And let's say there's a solid line of cars there and we can never get over. Or possibly even get rear-ended, okay? Or very closely related, they just maintain the speed. Okay. What I will usually have them do is this. I will usually have them accelerate in front of the cars. This requires, in many cases, getting out of the comfort zone. But I'm good at getting people out of their comfort zone as far as speed goes, okay? Because sometimes slowing way down to dropping back could create a danger. So that decision, you have to look at the factors and make a properly critical decision. Of my 3 cars, 2 of them accelerate very fast. Okay. One of my cars is like scary fast. I buy those cars on purpose because I want the power when it's needed. Okay. There again, driving too slow can be very dangerous. Okay. And when you want your kid to change lanes, think way ahead of the situation. Standard width Seattle residential street. There's room for a total of 3 vehicles. And I will tell you kind of I'm doing a little editorial here, but I really wish these streets were one way. I really do. God, that would solve so many, especially in some neighborhoods. I hate it. When you got to like, who's going to go? You got like a Mexican standoff. In these cases, the proper thing to do is to keep the vehicle perfectly centered between the parked cars. So if somebody opens a door on either side, you can still make it through. But a lot of new drivers will stick to the right, which is sort of working until somebody opens a door, and then it won't. Okay. Or they go too far to the right and scrape. Why does this happen? It happens because they are not intuitively, notice the term intuitively. They are not intuitively aware of the right side of the vehicle because they are staring 50 feet right in front of the car like they've got tunnel vision. And they're not going to know they're too far to the right until they hear the scraping metal. It's very common for me. You're going to find this too, probably. With many students, I am constantly pushing the steering wheel over to the left. And then immediately they start wandering off to the right. Okay? So be aware of that lane placement issues are usually wandering too far off to the right. You definitely want to avoid personal issues. Any issue that, yeah. Now you may be really tempted to do that. You think, God, this would be fun to bring a megaphone and just yell, Don't do that. It only makes things worse, okay? Whatever issue you have with your kid that's big outside the car, just expands to something about 5 times that big inside the car. It just has a way of just, blowing up other problems. So just try to leave all that crap at the curb, okay? Yeah, some stuff you should do. Make sure you're giving very clear directions well in advance. There should be no doubt about what you want them to do. And if you want them to turn right at the next signal, tell them about it a few blocks in advance, not when you're right there going 40 miles an hour. Okay? Don't say right unless you mean the direction right. Okay? Another thing I'll tell you is that a lot of students have no conception of right and left. So you may have to point. Oh, huge, huge issue here. More iced tea than I'll tell you. Keep you in suspense. Although I don't think anybody actually is. This is, no. I will tell you for an absolute fact that this is the biggest reason people fail the drive test. I gave 6 drive tests yesterday, and 3 people failed the test for the same reason at exactly the same place. Okay. Is that they don't get into the correct lanes for the turns. There will be a picture about that in a few minutes, okay? You want to look further ahead than you normally would. You want to think further ahead than you normally would. Again, narrate. Plan the routes in advance. Plan the routes for safety, not necessarily because they're the fastest way to get there or the way you always went. Okay, and again, realize that a lot of them don't know their right from their left, even though they say they do. What I tell my students is, okay, that are getting confused, is think which hand you write with. And when I say right or left, take half a second to think which hand you write with. Good way to remember it. I'm not big on how fast we're going. I usually don't care how fast we're going because we're going to move with the traffic flow, period. No argument about that, okay? Because to not do so is just asking for trouble. I am very big on proper following distance. Now, the legal minimum is 2 seconds. That's way too close. Okay. So, normal 4 to 6. I will have my students generally about 5 to 6 seconds back because their total stopping distance is going to be longer than it is that will be later on. But in the beginning, the total stopping distance for students is longer. So I'd always tell my students, look, always have enough distance in front of you. So if the vehicle in front just stops all of a sudden for any reason, okay, there is no doubt you can stop before running into it. So space is your friend. Okay, this is the corner of Lake City Way and Northeast 115th Street. We are going northbound. My office is on Northeast 113th Street. On the drive test, there are 2 drive test routes. They've got fantastic names, Route 1 and Route 2, like great names. Okay. We either turn right at 115th at the Shell station, or we go up to Northeast 120th Street at the Chevron station at the next light and turn right. It's the same situation at each one. Okay, so I expect the person I'm testing to figure out that they need to be in that right lane to turn right. Yet, an alarming number of people I'm testing, both my own students and others, they make the turn from the through lane. If it's dangerous, I won't let them do it. And then the test ends at that point. They have failed, okay? Because that's a violation. And it can be dangerous, potentially. Now, the reason usually they give for not getting in that lane is that they are afraid. Look at that. That's about 75 feet of broken line. And they're afraid to cross the solid white line into the right lane. Well, the fact of the matter is that all special purpose lanes, bike lanes or bus lanes, become turn lanes at the intersection. And it's perfectly okay to cross the line to get over there. In fact, if you wait till the line breaks there, it's usually too late even to get into the lane, or it often can be. Okay. So, I mean, I tell people very jokingly, I say, look, just do it. It's not like you're committing nuclear terrorism or something. Just cross over there a little early. It's no big deal. That's the proper way to do it. Okay. And when I used to have my office in Fremont, that's the corner of Northwest 8th and 58th Street. And there again, most people that failed the test failed because they did not get into that turn lane to make the turn because they're afraid to cross the yellow line. Well, I say, I got news for you. That is the turn lane. That's where you got to get the car. Okay. Okay. Let me show you the biggest cause of collisions amongst inexperienced drivers, and it's not what you think. It's not speeding. It's not playing with the phone. Those are definitely big factors. But here is the big one. Here is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It is tunnel vision. If we are driving on good old 34th Avenue West in Magnolia there, we would see something like this. In fact, our peripheral vision would see more each direction, okay? But there's a limit to what I can do here. We, or the experienced driver, would easily see that stop sign. There would be no mistake about it. When people first start driving, however, that's often not what they're seeing. It is that. It's like they're looking through a tube. It's tunnel vision, and they cannot see the stop sign. As experience is gained, that tunnel vision usually very quickly expands out. But in the beginning, it can be that way. All right. So when you're approaching stop signs, you might have to say, point it out, stop sign ahead. And that will draw their attention. Just be aware that a lot of times they will have that tunnel vision and you're going to see things that they're not seeing. But don't worry about it. As they gain experience, they very quickly will see it. Here's something that I have never, ever, ever been able to figure out. There are a few other things in this world I've never been able to figure out either, but I won't get into that right now, although it's probably more interesting than this. More iced tea here. Ooh. Okay. Those of you who live in Magnolia, which I think maybe one or two of you do, or those of you who ever go to Magnolia, which, by the way, is a good place to go to practice driving. It's much better than Queen Anne or Ballard, okay? So Magnolia, fantastic place to practice driving. This is the corner of 28th Avenue West and West Blaine Street. There's a Christian Science church on the right there you can't see. Christian Science, that's that religion where they don't believe in doctors or hospitals. Hence the empty parking lot and the constant recruiting campaigns. Hopefully you thought that was funny. Hopefully you did. Okay, so even students that would stop at every other stop sign in the universe, northbound, they would blow right through that stop sign, which is right out there in the open. It's not hard to see. But that particular, I've never been able to figure out why that is, but just be aware of it.